They didn't all die. When fire consumed the Knights Templar, when kings and popes conspired to erase them from history, some vanished. Not into smoke, not into ash, into silence. Into bloodlines. Into names that still echo today. Imagine standing in the ruins of a medieval chapel. The moonlight pours through broken arches. Beneath your feet, a cracked stone bears a seal, not a cross, but something older, stranger. And watching. You feel it, don't you? The weight of centuries pressing down, whispering that this is not just history, it's survival. This is not a story about myths. It's about families who refused to die, who carried their secrets through blood, marriage, and silence. Tonight, I lead you through shadows that historians avoid, vaults never opened, and names erased on purpose. We'll ask the question no one dares. What if the Templar bloodline never ended? And more importantly, who still protects it? But before we descend into this labyrinth of secrecy and survival, pause. Because here, nothing is what it seems. If you're new to this channel, subscribe now and keep the bell turned on. You'll want to hear every whisper that history tried to bury. Because once you begin this journey, you won't see the world the same way again. Ready? Then follow me into the bloodline that refused to die. October 13th, 1307, Paris, just before dawn. The city still sleeps beneath a bruised sky. But in the alleys and squares, armored boots strike stone in perfect rhythm. Torches flare, sealed orders unfold, and one by one, the doors of the Knights Templar crash open. But something is wrong. The arrests go smoothly, too smoothly. No pitched battles, no last stands. For an order of warrior monks famed for their defiance, the silence is deafening. Because when the king's men storm the commanderies, they find robes, records, relics, but not the treasure, not the secret books, not even the Grand Master himself. It's as if dozens, maybe hundreds of Templars simply vanished. And that's where the story begins, not with fire, but with absence. The kind of absence that feels deliberate. A disappearance written not in chaos, but in silence. A silence that still whispers today. Historians argue. Some say it was luck. Others whisper of a deeper network, a warning system. But there's a third possibility, rarely spoken aloud, that the Templars planned for this moment. That escape wasn't failure, it was prophecy. A Genoese merchant, weeks after the arrests, complains of crates never collected. Their destination? Scotland, then excommunicated by Rome. A land where papal law had no teeth. A land where knights could vanish into mist. Letters speak of vaults already emptied, ships quietly rerouted, and symbols carved into stone that don't match the cross. Rosettes, intertwined serpents, sigils ignored by the church. Because the Pope wanted heresy, the king wanted gold, but someone else wanted survival. And if you listen closely, across 7 centuries, you can still hear it, the faint echo of a door closing behind them. Not an ending, an exit. This is chapter 1 of our descent into the final bloodline. If you feel the weight of what you've just heard, stay with me, because this story only gets darker. Subscribe now and keep the bell turned on, because the next chapter will uncover the blood that refused to burn. When fire could not erase them, blood carried them forward. You see, the true treasure of the Templars was never gold. It was never jewels or land. It was legacy. A legacy carved into bone, whispered through bloodlines, hidden in plain sight. Despite their vows of chastity, many knights left behind more than swords and relics. Sons born quietly, daughters hidden in convents, nephews who suddenly inherited unexplained estates. When the order fell, the blood flowed elsewhere. Across Europe, entire family trees reveal missing generations, eras erased, children unnamed, as if history itself conspired to hide them. Yet strangely, after 1312, certain families rose with breathtaking speed. Minor houses became powerful overnight. Their banners bore unfamiliar symbols, double-barred crosses, interlaced triangles, red blooms that were not roses. They called themselves not lords, but custodians. Custodians of what? Of who? Their dead buried with feet facing Jerusalem. A ritual forbidden since the order's suppression, yet practiced in silence. There are whispers of a Templar commander, arrested but defiant, who sent his nephews away with a final command: forget our name, keep the seal. And so, bloodlines were preserved not on parchment, but in veins. Generation after generation, never loud, never obvious. Always in shadow, always waiting. In Switzerland, families with no claim to nobility suddenly built libraries. In Scotland, a cavalry charge appeared at the Battle of Bannockburn, knights in unfamiliar armor who struck like phantoms. In Italy, houses with no Templar record began to wield extraordinary influence. Each story dismissed as coincidence, but together they form a pattern, a red thread that refuses to be cut. And here is the question that should unsettle you. If the Templar bloodline survived, who protects it now? Who ensures that centuries later, their secrets still remain hidden? This is only the beginning. In the next chapter, we'll descend deeper into the vaults, the forbidden archives, and the sealed chapels where relics and bones tell a story the Church tried to erase. If you're still with me now, subscribe, join our journey, and remember, history's greatest secrets are never lost. They are hidden, waiting for those brave enough to look. Bloodlines may whisper, but vaults keep their silence. Across Europe, hidden beneath castles, monasteries, and ruined chapels, lie chambers no historian has entered. Doors that have never been opened, libraries sealed for generations, crypts where the dead rest facing east, watching. In Switzerland, beneath an unremarkable manor in the canton of Valais, a library was discovered sealed since the 14th century. Inside were manuscripts on sacred geometry, encoded Latin, and genealogical charts that didn't match any public records. The family who owned it, still alive, still silent. In France, a chapel renovation in 1973 uncovered a fresco hidden under plaster. A knight knelt before a woman in red robes, a glowing cross on his chest. At the bottom, a single phrase, Il votum servitum est. The vow is kept. But the most disturbing are the vaults beneath Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Sealed for centuries, never excavated, despite whispers of relics. Or bones that do not belong to any Sinclair. Why keep them sealed? What sleeps beneath that stone? And then there are the private archives names we will never hear. The Monta family in France, the Massimo family in Italy. Asked why their collections remain locked, they simply reply, "It is not ours to share." What does that mean? Not ours to share? Everywhere the Templars touched, silence follows. Entire generations erased from family records. Sealed documents marked Reservatum Pontificium locked away in Vatican vaults, inaccessible even today. Why? If the Templars were truly finished, Why does the church still guard their secrets like burning coals? And here is the horror hidden beneath the history. Silence is never empty. Silence is deliberate. And silence is survival. In the next chapter, we descend further into the rituals, the symbols, and the coded messages scattered across Europe. Symbols that were never meant to be seen, and vows that were never meant to be broken. If you're still here, subscribe and step deeper into the dark with me, because the silence is about to speak. History writes in ink, but power writes in symbols. For centuries, the families whispered to be tied to the Templars have carried a language of shadows, a code etched not in books, but in stone, in glass, and in blood. A single red bloom. At first glance, harmless, but in heraldry, no rose is ever just a rose. Some appear blood red, centered in a cross. To the church, it is blasphemy. To the families, it is memory. In Italy, noble crests suddenly bore serpents swallowing their tails, an ancient alchemical mark of eternity. In France, forgotten houses displayed interlaced triangles, too close to the seal of Solomon to be coincidence. And in Scotland, symbols carved into chapel pillars align with stars, forming constellations that shouldn't exist in a single room, unless the room itself was a code. One scholar once whispered, Rosslyn Chapel is not a church. It is a map. But a map to what? To whom? And then there are the mottos, phrases that surface across hidden archives, scrawled in margins, etched in rings passed down generations. Custodes sanguinis regi, guardians of the blood, il votum servitum est. The vow is kept. And one phrase darker still, sub rosa, beneath the rose. A vow sworn in silence and sealed in blood. But the most chilling is this: some heraldic devices are not symbols at all, but maps. Arrange them across Europe and patterns emerge. Clusters from constellations. And one constellation repeats, Virgo, the Virgin. The Black Madonna, the divine feminine line, a bloodline said to run parallel to kings and priests. A bloodline the church could never acknowledge. And here is the truth the Vatican never speaks. These symbols are not dead. They are still alive. Hidden in family crests, etched into rings worn at private ceremonies, stitched into garments never shown in public. A silent oath carried across generations. So I ask you, when you see a crest on a castle gate, when you pass a cathedral window glowing with red and gold, are you looking at art? Or at a message? A warning? A vow? In the next chapter, we step into forbidden ground, into the Vatican's shadow, into archives marked Reservatum Pontificium, records sealed for 700 years. Because if blood is memory, then these documents are chains. Subscribe, stay close, and brace yourself. The deeper we go, the darker it becomes. The church condemned them as heretics, idolaters, corrupters of Christendom. And yet, what does the Vatican guard more fiercely than any treasure? The records of the Templars. Records locked away for 7 centuries. Not destroyed, not forgotten, contained. In 1312, when Pope Clement dissolved the order, official documents proclaimed the knights guilty. But deep within the papal archives, there exists another set of registers. They are not for scholars. They are not for the faithful. They are marked Reservatum Pontificium, reserved for the pontiff alone. What could they contain? Why guard the memory of heretics, unless they were never truly destroyed? Unless the Vatican understood what kings feared, that you can burn men, but you cannot burn blood. Among the missing is one book, the Genealogia Ordinis, a genealogy of the order. Not just names of knights, but families, wives hidden in convents, sons raised in secrecy, nephews who carried seals across borders. A lineage meant not for the world, but for survival. And perhaps the most damning clue lies in a single scribbled note found in a 19th century Vatican inventory log. It reads, "Relic moved to Castel Gandolfo." Ensure no mention of Male. Why mention the last Grand Master of the Templars in a record about relics? Unless what was moved was not a symbol, but something far more dangerous. Something living. Something inherited. The Vatican never speaks of it. They deny its existence. Yet generation after generation, they keep the chains tight, the doors sealed. Because if the bloodline truly survived, if its heirs walk among us, then the Church's greatest enemy did not die in fire. It was preserved, protected, hidden in silence, perhaps even within the walls of the Vatican itself. In the next chapter, we step out of the archives and into the world, into the marriages, the heirs, and the political unions that reshaped Europe. Because sometimes, power does not march with armies. Sometimes it sleeps in bloodlines, waiting to rise. They called themselves warriors of Christ. But in whispers, they were something else. Not soldiers, not monks, but keepers of rituals. Rites spoken only in candlelit chambers. Oaths sworn not to kings, not to popes, but to blood. Historians dismiss the rumors that Templars worshipped a severed head, kissed one another in forbidden places, drank from chalices of blood. They call it propaganda, a weapon of their enemies. But what if it was something more dangerous than blasphemy? What if it was initiation? A ritual whispered across interrogation speaks of a vow sub rosa, beneath the rose. To the outside world, it was shameful. But to the initiated, it was sacred. The rose was no flower. It was a veil, a promise that secrets would be buried in silence, sealed not by parchment, but by blood itself. One fresco uncovered in southern France depicts a knight bowing before a woman in red. Scholars call her allegory. Locals whisper another name, the Mother in Shadow. Was she the Virgin? A goddess? Or the embodiment of the bloodline itself? The one to whom every knight swore silent obedience? And then there are the bones. Crypts unearthed in France and Italy hold skeletons buried not with crosses, but with strange sigils carved into their skulls. Spirals, stars, serpents biting their tails. These were not graves of soldiers. These were vessels, flesh carrying a secret oath to the grave. Folklore tells of red brides, women brought from foreign lands, married into minor houses, carrying locked chests that no one dared open. Inside, some say, were relics. Others insist. Bones. The bones of those who were meant to rise again when the time was right. And here is the most unsettling whisper of all, that the Templars did not die for their sins. They died for their knowledge. Knowledge guarded in blood rituals, whispered oaths, secret tombs. Knowledge too dangerous for kings or popes to hold, but not too dangerous to be preserved. In families, in silence, in you. In the next chapter, we follow the trail of marriages and heirs, the quiet unions that reshaped kingdoms, forged dynasties, and buried the Templar oath not in stone, but in veins. Stay with me. Subscribe now, because what comes next will change the way you see Europe's noblest families. Forever. Not every battle is fought with swords. Some are fought in silence, at wedding altars, in sealed chambers, with vows that bind not only lovers, but bloodlines. When the Templars burned, their gold vanished, their vaults emptied, but their most precious inheritance, their blood, was never lost. It was hidden in marriages, in alliances that reshaped Europe from the shadows. Historians whisper of the Red Brides, women who appeared from nowhere, marrying into minor lords across France, Aragon, and Scotland. They carried with them foreign seals, strange rings, and most chillingly, locked chests that no one was permitted to open. Whatever they carried, it was not dowry, it was legacy. And then there are the heirs who should never have existed. Sons born after fathers were burned at the stake. Daughters raised in convents only to emerge decades later as brides to power. Coincidence or design? The Habsburgs built an empire not through conquest, but through marriage. Their brides came from obscure noble houses, women with no brothers, their inheritance is mysteriously uncontested. Scholars dismiss it as luck. But what if it was orchestration? What if someone, somewhere, was ensuring the bloodline never died, only transferred? Patterns emerge. Minor houses suddenly rising after 1312. Marriages uniting families that shared no land, no strategic alliance, but shared something else. Something unspoken. Why marry for power when you can marry for blood? And so the blood flowed, quietly and visibly, through centuries. From castles in Aragon to courts in Vienna. From forgotten abbeys to the very heart of Rome. Every union another thread in the web. Every child another vessel of memory. This is the secret of Europe's noblest dynasties. Not all crowns are won on battlefields. Some are inherited in silence. Some are arranged not by kings or queens, but by vows sworn in darkness centuries earlier. And if the Templar bloodline truly survived, then its power was not lost, it was crowned. In the next chapter, we turn to the conspiracies of power, how these hidden heirs may have shaped wars, empires, and revolutions. Stay with me. Subscribe now, because what we uncover next will not only disturb history, it will disturb the present. History tells us kings rise, queens fall, and empires crumble through war, chance, and fate. But what if some of those shifts were not chance at all? What if behind the crowns and the treaties, behind the revolutions and the wars, there was another hand? An invisible hand guiding, pulling, whispering, a hand bound by blood. When the Templars were destroyed, their enemies celebrated. But within decades, strange things began to happen. Families no one had heard of suddenly commanded armies. Dynasties with no claim to power inherited kingdoms through improbable marriages. And revolutions from Scotland to France were not just spontaneous uprisings, but curiously well-funded, as if someone, somewhere, wanted thrones to fall. One legend tells of the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Out of the morning mist, a cavalry charge struck the English flank with surgical precision. Where did these knights come from? Chroniclers said their armor was unfamiliar. Were they Scottish? Or were they something else? Something older? Survivors of a brotherhood that refused to die? Even in 1789, whispers persisted. France burned, not just with revolution, but with vengeance. Pamphlets circulated bearing strange symbols, not of liberty or fraternity, but of roses and crosses. Was it coincidence? Or was it a memory resurfacing? A bloodline seeking to finish what fire could not erase centuries before? And then, The bankers. Switzerland, Germany, Italy. Families with no noble titles suddenly wielded wealth greater than kings. They claimed to be merchants, yet some wore rings marked with sigils found in abandoned Templar commanderies. Wealth is power, and power, when silent, is far more dangerous than armies. Across centuries, patterns repeat. Minor houses gain influence, then vanish. Wars erupt where they had holdings. Treaties benefit their heirs. Coincidence after coincidence, until you stop calling it coincidence and start calling it design. So ask yourself, were the great events of Europe, wars, alliances, revolutions, truly written by kings and emperors? Or were they orchestrated by silent heirs, bound by an oath older than nations? If the Templar bloodline survived, then history itself is not what we were taught. It is a script, and someone has been holding the pen. In the next chapter, we will follow the trail into modern times, into DNA studies, hidden archives, and whispers of families that still walk among us. If you've made it this far, subscribe now, because the next revelation may change not just how you see the past, but how you see the world today. For centuries, whispers of the Templar bloodline belonged to folklore, to legend, to dusty manuscripts locked behind stone walls. But in the 21st century, a new witness has emerged. One that does not lie. One that cannot be silenced. DNA. In the early 2000s, geneticists in Europe quietly began cross-referencing noble bloodlines for hereditary diseases. But what they found was something they did not expect. Anomalies. Markers more common to Levantian populations than to Western Europe. Traces that should not exist, unless blood had traveled across crusades, across centuries, and survived. One French archivist compiled a list of families known to have sheltered Templars in the 14th century. When modern surnames were compared against this list, the results were disturbing. Matches appeared again and again. Families that should have had no connection to the Templars shared silent blood. Coincidence? Or continuity? And then came Julian, a civil servant from Marseille. In 2007, he submitted his DNA for a national ancestry program. His results linked him not only to multiple noble families of France, but to a 14th century registry listing his ancestor as Custos, Temple sub Rosa, guardian of the temple beneath the rose. Julian himself had never heard the name, but his blood remembered. Private labs, funded by anonymous patrons, have since requested discrete tests. Some trace maternal lines, haplogroups that lead not to Europe at all, but to Judea, to the 1st century. To a lineage so dangerous, most labs refuse to publish results. What does it mean if the heirs of the temple carry not only European, but biblical blood? And yet, in Switzerland, France, and Italy, certain families remain untouchable. They own libraries that scholars cannot access, chapels that never open. Their names rarely surface in politics, but appear quietly, discreetly, in philanthropy, in banking, in art foundations. They are polite. They are silent. But their blood speaks louder than history. So ask yourself, when you shake a hand at a gala, when you pass someone on the street, when you see a name etched on a plaque, could you be looking into the eyes of history's greatest secret? Could the bloodline be standing right in front of you? Not a myth, not a story. A person, alive, today. In the next chapter, we step into the secret orders of modernity, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Priory of Sion, Are they imitations of the Templars or continuations? Subscribe now and follow me deeper. Because if the blood still walks among us, the oath still binds them. The Templars were burned in fire. Their name was erased, but their oath never ended. For centuries, fragments of their legacy have resurfaced in strange new forms. Societies that claim no link to the temple, yet carry its shadow in every symbol, every rite, every silence. The Freemasons, a brotherhood of builders, philosophers, and rulers. To the public, they are architects of democracy. But their lodges echo with rituals too old to be Enlightenment inventions. They wear aprons of builders, yet whisper oaths beneath the rose. Are they new? Or simply the Templar oath in a new skin? The Rosicrucians, mystics of the Renaissance, claiming divine wisdom. Their symbol? A rose blooming from a cross. Not a Christian emblem, but an echo of something older, whispered in Templar vaults. Their manifestos never mention the temple, and yet every page drips with its shadow. And then, the Priory of Sion, to some a hoax. To others, a continuation of the sacred bloodline itself. Their claims, too outrageous, too dangerous, suggest that kings and empires were pawns, and that the true heirs have always been hidden, watching, guiding, protecting something the world is not ready to see. Across centuries, each order has risen, claimed power, and vanished again. But patterns remain. Genealogy requirements. Symbols carved where no outsider ever looks. Oaths whispered in languages long forgotten. Always the same question, spoken in silence. Who is your blood? And if you believe it all to be coincidence, then ask yourself this. Why do these symbols still appear in cathedrals built long after the temple fell? Why do families with no crowns wield more quiet influence than kings? Why, after 700 years, does the Vatican still seal archives it swears are meaningless? Asterisk, the Templars were not destroyed. Their bloodline lived. Their oath survived. And their legacy walks among us, not as a memory, but as a presence. In families, in symbols, in societies you may pass every day without seeing. And perhaps, in you, this is the end of our journey, but not the end of theirs. History is not finished. It is alive. If you've followed me through the fire, through the vaults, through the blood, then subscribe now. Because the story does not end here. It never ends. It only hides, waiting for those brave enough to look.